Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission is to take complex source material, in this case, it's transcripts, and some pretty deep background briefings from Washington insiders, and really distill the nuggets of insight you need to be well-informed.
And today, the sources are, well, they're painting an alarming picture.
They really are. It's not just about political opposition facing the administration anymore. It seems to be a profound internal sense of collapse.
Yeah.
We've been looking through Republican commentary, insider briefings, and the consensus is jarring. The current leader is being discussed as someone whose story is, well, fundamentally over. That his biography is now about the past, not any kind of credible future.
And that phrase, it came up again and again in what we were reading.
It did.
That the administration is at the end of its story. And that's really the analytical center of this deep dive. It signifies a really rapid erosion of both institutional stability and, I think, personal political control. The material suggests this instability is showing up across three critical dimensions that we really have to explore today.
Okay, so let's break that down.
Okay, so first, there's a radical, almost isolationist policy overhaul. It's formalized in the new National Security Strategy, the NSS.
We'll get into that. It's a wild document.
It is. Second, you see the very real, very damaging domestic fallout from that policy.
Yeah.
We're talking economic consequences, things that hit the average American wallet.
Yeah.
And finally, there are accelerating signs of political succession maneuvering.
Yeah.
An internal collapse, really, among cabinet members, major funders, everyone trying to secure their own future.
It sounds like a sinking ship. Okay, so let's analyze this shift. Our deep dive today is designed to connect these three key areas of instability, from that high-level geopolitical strategy right down to the price of your coffee and the chaos in the West Wing.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is. It's an extensive analysis, but we need to start at the top with the institutional blueprint for this radical shift, the national security strategy. The sources describe it using some truly extreme language.
Yeah. And to really appreciate the gravity of this new NSS, you have to have a little context.
Okay, so what is this thing, normally?
Well, the National Security Strategy is a document mandated by Congress. Every administration has to produce one. And historically, it's a complete non-event.
Right.
It's usually a 30, maybe 40-page document full of, lofty, non-controversial goals supporting democracy, maintaining alliances, fighting terrorism, that sort of thing.
One of our sources had a great description for it.
They called it a bowl of porridge.
A bowl of porridge, exactly. Bland, easily digestible, and you forget about it the second you're done.
Right. It's bureaucratic compliance. You check the box and move on.
So why on earth are Washington insiders, and this includes people sympathetic to the administration, calling this latest NSS outrageous?
Because this one is not porridge. It's a deliberate, frontal assault on the entire architecture of U.S. foreign policy, the one that's existed since World War II.
So not a subtle shift?
No, not at all. It explicitly codifies an isolationist stance that, well, it openly minimizes the importance of our longstanding allies, while at the same time offering this unusually conciliatory language toward traditional U.S. adversaries.
Specifically Russia and China.
Specifically Russia and China. So what we're seeing is a doctrinal reversal. Foundational global security principles are just being thrown out in favor of a distinctly unilateral and nationalist focus.
And this profound realignment, it's clearest in the NSS's new geographic focus, right? It seems to shift all the resources and strategic attention away from the traditional hotspots, Europe, the Middle East, and it prioritizes the Western Hemisphere.
Precisely. The analysis suggests the administration is making a very calculated decision to move diplomatic, military, all of its assets closer to home.
And why? What does that get them?
It gives them the justification for aggressive unilateralism. By focusing inwardly, the administration is basically saying that the high-risk unilateral actions we've seen recently, and we'll talk about the defense secretary later.
Oh, we will.
That those aren't outliers. They're intended to become the centerpiece of U.S. foreign policy going forward. The NSS provides the strategic rationale for it all.
Okay, so that brings us to this fascinating, very focused concept from the transcripts, the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. So for anyone who needs a quick history refresher, the original Monroe Doctrine from the 19th century was about keeping European colonial powers out of the Americas. It was defensive.
It was. Keep out. This is our backyard.
Exactly. So how does this new corollary fundamentally change that definition?
Oh, the change is massive. It shifts the doctrine from being a shield against external interference to being a sword for aggressive regional control. Yeah. This new corollary as it's institutionalized in the NSS, suggests the U.S. not only prohibits external interference, but it reserves the right to unilaterally decide who deals with what resources within the hemisphere.
Oh, okay. Unpack that. So this is a claim of, like, hemispheric dominance. It goes way beyond just non-intervention.
It's active control. Control over trade, security, resource allocation.
So an example would be if the U.S. finds other nations, let's say China or a European power, trying to secure access to critical resources like lithium in South America,
Right.
or trying to manage water rights in Central America, the NSS gives the U.S. justification to just step in aggressively.
Absolutely. The language is extremely territorial. The sources interpret the NSS as sending a very clear warning. If others cross the United States on resources or influence in the Western Hemisphere, the U.S. will handle it.
On its own.
On its own. Bypassing international agreements, bypassing traditional diplomatic channels. And that right there is the key analytic nugget. It reveals this profound strategy. The administration isn't just threatening unilateral moves, it's codifying them into the foundational national security text.
So they're building the legal and strategic framework to justify future high-risk, non-consultative military or diplomatic action, all under the banner of protecting the hemisphere.
Exactly. And it's a strategic decision that fundamentally isolates the U.S. from its established security partners.
Well, it has to. I mean, this inward turn and this unilateralism in our own hemisphere must, by definition, require a significant abandonment of our traditional responsibilities elsewhere, particularly in Europe. So what is the shocking language the NSS uses when it talks about our transatlantic partners?
Well, the section on Europe is titled, rather benignly, Promoting European Greatness.
Sounds nice enough.
It does. But the sources analyzing the document argue that the language inside this section is a direct reflection of the underlying MGA worldview. It emphasizes a deep ideological alignment with these ethno-nationalist movements that are now ascendant all across Europe.
Okay, let's get specific on the language that has caused so much alarm. The document talks about Europe facing economic decline, but then it pivots very sharply to what it calls the real and more stark prospect of civilizational erasure.
Chilling phrase.
Civilizational erasure. How, according to the transcripts, is this highly charged term being interpreted?
This is the crucial question, isn't it? And the consensus among the analysts is that this language is steeped in racist and ethnocentrist undertones.
So it's code.
It is absolutely coded language. When the NSS refers to civilizational erasure, the interpretation from the sources is that this refers to the fear that non-white, non-Christian people are permanently altering the demographic and cultural landscape of Europe.
So it's the Great Replacement theory?
It is directly mirroring the anti-immigrant ethno-nationalist narratives, what are often called Great Replacement theories, that are staples of far-right political parties globally, from Russia to Hungary to, well, here.
And so the NSS is institutionalizing a deeply prejudiced and divisive worldview right into the policy of the United States government.
Correct. It's making it official.
So according to the sources, this is more than just some rhetorical affinity. It's actually a blueprint for institutionalizing global racism, because the NSS explicitly states the U.S. will actively support political parties that are aligned with these views in Europe.
Yes.
That is direct interference in the internal politics of our allies.
It's active and it's ideological interference. The analysis highlights that the U.S. is signaling a willingness to interfere with the domestic laws of allied states.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The sources claim the U.S. will actively push back against anti-hate speech laws in countries like Germany,
which were designed to combat the rise of neo-Nazis and white supremacists.
Exactly. The U.S. will argue that those laws infringe on free speech. The net result is that the U.S. is strategically lining itself up with the far right in German politics, with Marine Le Pen's movement in France, and with figures like Nigel Farage and the Reform Party in the U.K.
This is a radical break. I mean, an explicit radical break from decades of U.S. policy, which was aimed at supporting moderate, democratic, and centrist governance in NATO countries.
A complete shattering of that policy.
And this alignment against historical allies and democratic norms, it immediately connects the NSS to this growing, global, pro-authoritarian, anti-globalist alliance.
No, it does.
The sources suggest the U.S. is consciously abandoning its role as a democratic leader and is now signing on to what they call a coalition of aggressor nations.
That's the term they use.
Who's on that roster? Who are the global leaders whose views the NSS is implicitly endorsing here?
Well, the list is defined by leaders who share this combination of ethno-nationalism, skepticism of global institutions, and a preference for strongman governance. Besides Putin and Hungary's Orbán, the sources cite Narendra Modi in India, who's been criticized for his policies targeting Muslims.
Right.
Bibi Netanyahu in Israel, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, and Javier Milei in Argentina.
So if we connect the dots, the sources are arguing the U.S. is shifting its allegiance away from the liberal international order and toward a bloc defined by nationalist aggression and intolerance.
It's an incredible strategic pivot. It signals U.S. support for intolerance and aggression globally. The sources call it siding with the baddies.
And this turn toward isolationism and an authoritarian alignment, it echoes a very specific, very dark chapter of American history. Let's draw that historical parallel to the pre-World War II America First movement.
The historical resonance is undeniable. It's crucial to understanding the ideological shift. The original America First movement in the late 30s and early 40s was defined by its rigid isolationism.
Figures like Henry Ford and the aviator Charles Lindbergh.
That's right. They argued forcefully against U.S. involvement in the European War. They were essentially advocating for letting Hitler dominate the continent.
And critically, the sources point out that this isolationism was deeply intertwined with documented anti-Semitic prejudices and white supremacist ideology.
Exactly. So, by adopting the rhetoric and the core isolationist principles of the modern America First movement and putting them into the NSS, the analysis suggests the U.S. is rejecting the very lessons we learned from World War II about the necessity of alliances and the danger of unchecked isolationism.
And nothing encapsulates this alignment more clearly than the policy on Ukraine.
No.
The NSS states that the U.S. job is to simply promote stability in the European-Russian relationship.
It's breathtaking language.
The interpretation from the sources is that this institutionalizes the perception that the president is acting as Putin's errand boy.
That phrase from the source material is startling because it completely reframes the conflict. It minimizes Russia's role as the aggressor.
The U.S. is no longer the staunch supporter of an invaded democracy.
No. Instead, our role is simply to manage relations between the two parties. And this interpretation is amplified by reports that the last peace plan floated for Ukraine included several key Russian talking points.
So the analysis concludes that this document makes the administration's long-suspected favorable stance toward Russia official U.S. policy.
It does, potentially giving Moscow immense leverage and a huge strategic victory.
Now, Congress saw some of this coming, right? They tried to intervene. I know the Defense Authorization Act that passed recently included specific clauses to prevent the removal of troops from Europe.
That is correct. Congress, fearing precisely this kind of unilateral pullout, mandated that the president could not remove troops from Europe without consultation and detailed reports.
So there's a law, but what's the expectation among Washington insiders?
The expectation is that the president will simply ignore the congressional mandate.
Just ignore the law.
The pattern of behavior is to just enact the desired policy, start moving troops, closing bases, and then rely on bureaucratic inertia and the slow process of legal challenges.
So by the time Congress or the courts can effectively check the move,
the assets are already repositioned and the damage to NATO cohesion is already done. And this really highlights a fundamental institutional crisis. The administration is increasingly relying on the strategy of just ignoring inconvenient laws to advance its core isolationist goals.
This high-risk strategy, ignoring allies, ignoring internal checks, combined with this radical NSS, it has inevitably led to a complete breakdown in the command structure of the Department of Defense.
Yes.
And that brings us to a crisis in military and national security leadership.
Right. We have to turn our attention now to the Secretary of Defense, who the sources, often refer to with the shorthand Secretary of War or Hegseth.
Yeah.
And this really disturbing incident involving the blowing up of boats. This is so much more than a policy disagreement. It's a legal and a moral crisis that has completely destabilized the relationship between the civilian leadership and the professional military.
Okay, let's define the legal core of the problem here. The analysis suggests the actions taken during that boat incident could legally constitute murder. Why is that word, which is usually for criminal proceedings, being used in this high-level military context?
The sources are using the word murder because, under military law, the action violates the Uniform Code of Military Justice, or the UCMJ, as well as the international laws of war.
Okay, for our listener, the UCMJ is basically the legal framework for all U.S. military personnel.
Exactly. And the core reason for the murder accusation is that the U.S. is not in a state of declared war with the individuals who were targeted. And the specific act of targeting shipwrecked or non-combatant individuals in distress is a grave violation of military protocol and international conventions.
So sinking a disabled vessel before you even know the intent or status of the people on board.
Especially when they are clearly non-hostile, places the entire military command structure in direct breach of the laws that govern their conduct.
And the contradictory facts that came out around the incident just amplify the problem. It smacked of a cover-up, or at least willful negligence. What were the key facts that undermined the official story?
The facts, which were, leaked to the press by people inside who were opposed to the secretary, they revealed a very clear case of non-combatant distress.
Mm-hmm.
The sources confirmed the vessel was upside down. The people involved did not have a radio. They were not signaling hostility. They weren't even signaling for help.
And despite this clear evidence that they were just shipwrecked.
The Secretary of Defense reportedly insisted on aggressive action. The legal danger isn't just in the action itself, but in the clear intent to proceed with a killing that violated established rules of engagement. The analysis suggests the Secretary of Defense allegedly said something like, "Kill them all."
Wow. And this incident, it's really just the culmination of a series of highly unpopular actions that Hegseth has taken that have profoundly angered the professional military brass. Let's detail some of that internal damage he's caused.
Oh, he has systematically antagonized the senior uniformed leadership.
Huh.
Early on, there was this controversy they called Signalgate, which was an internal management blunder that led to a lot of staff turnover and a lack of confidence.
Okay.
But more damaging was the notorious DEI purge. The secretary allegedly focused on removing admirals and generals who were women or people of color and replacing them with white male loyalists.
Which would be seen as a massive insult to the meritocracy and the diversity of the modern armed forces.
A huge insult. On top of that, he directed the banning of certain books, the sources mentioned Jackie Robinson books, from military libraries. And he controversially started renaming military bases after Confederate generals.
These are actions that were deemed super unpopular and just fundamentally undermine the professionalism and morale of the career military. So here's the key dynamic. The generals fight back. The sources confirm Hegseth has, quote, pissed off all the generals and admirals who, crucially, know how to play the game better than a political appointee. So how are they retaliating in the sophisticated political environment of Washington?
Well, the generals and admirals are masters of institutional warfare. They get that a public fight is futile, but calculated leaks and congressional influence, that's deadly.
So when Hegseth tried to throw the admiral involved in the boat incident under the bus,
the senior brass retaliated strategically. This involved leaking highly damaging, very specific information about the incident and the secretary's conduct to high-profile media outlets, specifically the Washington Post.
Which drove the public narrative.
Exactly. And furthermore, they are strategically influencing Congress. The source notes a key indicator of no confidence. Senator Roger Wicker, the Republican head of the Senate Armed Services Committee, is notably not contacting Secretary Hegseth.
He's not calling him.
He's not calling him. And that silence is the ultimate signal that Wicker's committee, which controls military appropriations and oversight, is aligned with the internal military opposition.
So what does this internal Game of Thrones mean for the safety of U.S. troops globally? The sources stress this isn't just some political drama.
No, the real-world stakes are enormous.
Yeah.
If U.S. leadership acts outside the boundaries of international law and the UCMJ, it immediately places U.S. personnel at risk.
How so?
The sources draw a chilling historical parallel. After World War II, the U.S. prosecuted German and Japanese forces for war crimes, specifically for targeting and shooting shipwrecked American sailors.
Right.
So if the U.S. military now operates under the perception that it can shoot anybody anytime for any reason, it strips away the legal protections that are afforded to its own troops if they get captured or shipwrecked themselves.
And the prediction from the analysis?
That this legal and institutional crisis is too profound to ignore, and Hegseth is unlikely to survive this political and legal headache.
Okay, so moving from the chaos at the Pentagon to the advisory body at the White House, we see a parallel process of institutional sabotage. Let's talk about the dismantling of the National Security Council, the NSC.
The NSC is supposed to be the nexus of expertise, right? It brings together intelligence, diplomacy, military strategy, economic policy to advise the president.
It's supposed to be.
But the analysis confirms the NSC has been rendered functionally irrelevant. And the reason is the president actively discounts and ignores professional expertise, preferring loyalty and impulse.
And the staffing reflects that.
Catastrophically.
Ooh.
The NSC typically operates with a staff of 300 to 400 people to manage the complex needs of a global superpower. It's now allegedly down to only 60 or 70 people.
60 or 70.
Yeah, that's a staffing level comparable to what Henry Kissinger ran back in the 1970s. It reflects a dramatically reduced capacity for any kind of complex, nuanced strategic planning.
So who is filling this immense power vacuum? It seems to confirm the shift away from professional analysis toward just sheer political loyalty.
Well, the personnel shifts reveal the extent of the collapse. The sources suggest that Senator Marco Rubio is allegedly running the NSC.
Running the NSC.
But the narrative doesn't stop there. The sources humorously imply he's also managing the National Archives, the State Department, and USAC.
Okay, so that's obviously a hyperbole.
Of course.
But it highlights this absurd consolidation of power and the disregard for institutional boundaries.
It does. The implication is clear. Critical foreign policy and archival institutions are being managed by political loyalists who are often juggling multiple critical roles, which ensures that analysis is supplanted by the president's political agenda.
So crucial global decisions are being made outside any framework of professional governmental oversight.
That's the takeaway.
This radical institutional shift, this move toward unilateral isolationism, it has to hit the American consumer, right? It moves the discussion from high policy to the practical pain point of the wallet.
Inevitably.
So let's analyze how the administration's anti-globalist stance connects with its aggressive tariffs and trade policy reversal.
This administration is rejecting 80 years of established U.S. trade policy. The post-World War II multilateral system was explicitly built to eliminate tariffs and promote global free exchange.
And that was based on the painful lesson that tariffs often lead to trade wars and global depression.
Exactly. This new ideological stance, rooted in a deep distrust of globalization and international cooperation, has been executed via widespread tariffs. And for you listening, this isn't some abstract policy debate. It translates into immediate, tangible cost increases.
Okay, so what are those direct effects? How do these tariffs on, say, Chinese goods translate into rising costs for everyday American staples like coffee and chocolate?
Well, the mechanism is complex, but it's clear. The tariffs might initially target inputs like steel or aluminum, but then the retaliatory tariffs imposed by other nations, like on our agricultural products, drive up costs for exporters.
Right.
And the overall instability in the global supply chain, combined with the cost of the tariffs that importers have to pay, is simply passed directly on to the consumer.
So the sources specifically mention chocolate and coffee prices are rising
because the ingredients, or the means to process and transport them, are now subject to increased costs because of all this global trade friction.
And this inflation pressure isn't leveling off. What's the retail forecast for the near future?
The information suggests that major retailers are strategically holding back on significant price increases until after the big holiday shopping rush. The expectation is that late December and January will see a further substantial wave of price hikes implemented across the board. The administration promised that taxing imports would enrich America, but the reality, according to these sources, is that it's just creating sustained consumer inflation and financial pain for average families.
And the tariff strategy was primarily aimed at pressuring China, but the recently released Chinese trade data suggests this has been a resounding failure.
It has had what the sources describe as zero effect on China's overall economic trajectory. The data shows China's trade surplus is up to a staggering $1 trillion.
$1 trillion.
Which confirms that the U.S. attempts to reduce imports and pressure Beijing economically have not worked. And what's more, the specific promises made to American farmers that China would buy substantially more U.S. beef and soy.
That hasn't happened.
It has not materialized in the trade statistics. The tough talk and aggressive tariffs have not translated into favorable results for American exports or reduced leverage for the Chinese government.
This failure leads us to a really sophisticated and insightful piece of analysis from the sources about the administration's psychological approach to Beijing. They call it the dog park theory of foreign policy.
It's a brilliant analogy.
It is. We need to really explain this to the listener.
Okay, so the dog park theory uses this analogy to describe the president's personal approach to international relations. It posits that, much like dogs constantly sniffing each other in a park to determine dominance, world leaders are trying to figure out who the alpha dog is globally.
Yeah.
And the sources suggest that despite all the tough, aggressive rhetoric aimed at China, The president has internally concluded that Xi Jinping is, in fact, the global alpha dog.
And what are the policy consequences of that personal conclusion if he thinks Xi is the alpha?
Then the president seeks a trophy international relationship with China. This is framed as a personal, ego-driven calculation. Just like he seeks trophy properties or trophy accomplishments, he seeks the prestige that comes from aligning himself with the person he sees as the most powerful global figure.
And he doesn't think the fractured European Union can give him that validation.
No. So the analysis predicts specific outcomes. The president is planning a trip to China early next year, with Xi Jinping then planning a high-profile reciprocal visit to the U.S. later.
So this move is less about strategic advantage or economic benefit and entirely about personal validation, aligning with the figure he secretly believes holds the most power.
That's the theory.
So turning back to the domestic front, the collision of this failed economic strategy and the institutional instability suggests a terrible year ahead for regular Americans. This domestic reckoning will be profound. What are the specific ways the next year will feel terrible for voters?
Well, beyond the slower economy and the rising prices from tariffs, the source material predicts devastating specific cuts to essential social services.
Such as?
For instance, the analysis forecasts massive changes to healthcare policy. It suggests the cost of necessary health insurance could double, triple, even quadruple.
Wow.
Which would place vital health coverage out of reach for a significant portion of the population. And there are also expected to be significant, painful cuts to Veterans Administration services, undermining care for those who've served the country.
And the sources also mentioned that the cuts target some of the most vulnerable populations. What specific examples did they highlight?
Yes. The cuts extend to specialized programs that are just non-negotiable for struggling families. For example, the sources predict the cancellation of specific school bus services designed for disabled children.
So families are just on their own to find and fund complex transportation solutions.
That's right. These are direct, painful impacts on vulnerable individuals designed to appeal to a base that's motivated by government austerity. And on top of that, the hardline stance on immigration is predicted to escalate dramatically.
Let's elaborate on that predicted increase in ICE operations. What do the sources suggest the domestic impact will be?
The sources predict a significant intensification of ICE operations, leading to what they describe as the rounding up of neighbors in American cities.
And this increased enforcement will be pervasive, targeting people regardless of citizenship status or community contribution.
Yes, regardless of how long they've lived and worked in their communities. The goal, the sources suggest, is to create a constant, pervasive sense of fear and instability among immigrant communities and the wider society.
So this confluence of economic pain, rising fear, and these cruel cuts to social programs, it's predicted to make the year ahead extremely difficult for millions of voters, regardless of political affiliation.
Yes, that's the grim forecast.
All these threads, the policy failure, the institutional collapse, the economic pain, they all converge around this core thesis. The leader is visibly and politically at the end of his story. And this feeling is being driven not just by policy decisions, but by tangible physical signs of decline that Washington insiders are noticing and discussing.
That is correct. The sources repeatedly note the visible physical signs of the president's age-related weakness. We should note his age. He's 79, turning 80 on June 14th.
And his upcoming birthday, as an aside, is reportedly going to be celebrated with free admission to national parks.
Which the sources highlight as an intentional scheduling to avoid honoring Martin Luther King Day.
Right. But the insiders are citing visible evidence of infirmity, things like constant Band-Aids on his hands and detailed discussions about the circumference of his cankles.
Cankles, yeah.
Which is a common, highly specific shorthand for edema and fluid retention, suggesting circulatory or other health issues.
Right.
But why do these minor physical details become major political news items on the global stage?
Because they signal instability. If you connect this to the bigger picture of statecraft, foreign allies and adversaries are constantly monitoring the health and vitality of a nation's leader.
Sure.
Visible infirmity or signs of physical decline, it signals to the world that this is not a vigorous person. It confirms that his biography and his capacity are firmly fixed in the past.
And that perception of decline must accelerate the internal political jockeying for succession.
It absolutely does, because the feeling among insiders is that his hold on power is tenuous, and it may end unexpectedly.
And this perception of impending decline is further exacerbated by his extraordinary, almost frantic obsession with securing a personal legacy.
Yes, the president's fixation on naming objects after himself is cited by the sources as a strong indicator of how ill he thinks he is. It's a desperate psychological grab for some form of immortality.
What's on the list of attempted renamings?
The list is extensive and very revealing. He has openly wanted to name the Kennedy Center after himself. He's pushed hard to rename Dulles Airport after himself, and he successfully renamed the U.S. Institute of Peace after himself.
So this behavior is him looking for some legacy, because as the source material suggests, he fears he is shuffling off this mortal coil sooner rather than later. It sounds like an internal panic attack driving national policy.
That is the essential insight. The analysis argues this isn't the steady confidence of a leader planning a full term. It's the frantic attempt of a man obsessed with securing a permanent place in history before his time is up.
The need to literally inscribe his name on permanent national institutions is read by insiders as a strong signal of his own deep anxiety about his health and his political future.
That's right.
So as the president's grip loosens, the cabinet cage match for succession is clearly beginning. The sources confirm that Republicans are making fun of Trump behind the scenes, privately conceding he's not up to it and is crazy.
Yeah, the whispers are getting louder.
So what are the measurable signs of this political fragmentation and internal revolt?
Well, the fragmentation is moving from private whispers to public political action. The most visible sign recently was Marjorie Taylor Greene, a once fiercely loyal figure, openly denying she is May-gay.
Right, she insisted she is America first instead.
Exactly. And the source analysis frames this as a calculated political shift. By substituting America first, she's signaling a distance from the president's specific, unpredictable brand while keeping the nationalist ideology.
And that's critical. When key figures start creating public space between themselves and the leader, it signals that the fear of political retribution is diminishing.
And it shifts the entire dynamic toward succession.
So what's the complex strategy for those still in the inner circle, like Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance, as they actively position themselves for the next phase?
Their strategy is defined as seeking a soft landing. They understand they have to remain absolutely loyal to the president right now to keep their positions and influence.
But at the same time,
they're trying to position themselves as the conscience of the administration, establishing this quiet narrative for the future that says, I was the responsible adult. I was advising him not to do this horrible thing.
the goal is to accumulate political capital while avoiding the stigma of the impending collapse. They want to be seen as legitimate successors.
Right. So they have to build credibility for the future while remaining compliant in the present. The source material notes how difficult that balancing act is.
And this internal struggle will reportedly be symbolically cemented by a planned White House event.
Yes. The president's 80th birthday celebration is reportedly going to feature a WWE cage match event on the South Lawn.
A cage match.
Humorously speculated to be held in a structure dubbed the Golden Trumpagon. And while this is likely just political spectacle, the sources use it to symbolize the aggressive, gladiatorial atmosphere of political survival that now defines the administration.
The entire political culture has been reduced to a high-stakes, ruthless reality show where loyalty is the only currency.
Pretty much.
And this political scramble, it extends to the major figures funding and supporting the administration, the Silicon Valley Titans. The sources suggest a major reckoning is coming for them.
Individuals like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, they are walking an incredibly fraught ethical and financial tightrope right now.
Their calculus is purely transactional.
Completely. They're seeking maximum near-term gain regulatory favors, market advantages, pardons, while trying to structure their affairs to avoid being politically and financially stigmatized by whoever comes next.
They're hedging against the certainty of the administration's end, trying to extract value from the chaos without being tainted by the reckoning.
Exactly.
And what about the specific example of Palantir? What should shareholders be worried about with their all-in commitment to the administration?
Palantir is cited as a key example because the sources indicate the company's gone entirely all in on the administration. Their stock is described as significantly overvalued, trading at an unsustainable multiple compared to their actual real earnings, which are so heavily reliant on government contracts.
So for shareholders, there should be deep concern about a reckoning under a successor administration.
Yes, an administration that might audit, stigmatize, or just terminate contracts based on the perception that their success was based entirely on political favor, not on merit.
And the vanity projects associated with the administration also seem to be collapsing, which signals a broader failure.
Absolutely. The associated crypto venture, the sources specifically mention the Melania crypto, is reportedly down 90% in value.
90%.
It demonstrates that even the highly leveraged, high-risk financial bets made in direct association with the current power base are failing. It further undermines the credibility and the perceived financial genius of the associated figures.
Okay, so finally, let's tie this internal collapse and economic pain back to the major political prediction that informs this entire sense of an endgame.
The prediction among insiders is highly pessimistic for the president. The next year will be terrible because all the signs say the Republicans are going to do terribly in the upcoming election.
And if the Democrats manage to win control of the House or the Senate?
The political chapter for the president will be over immediately. He will face immediate impeachment proceedings, his programs will be dead in the water, and his ability to govern or influence the political landscape will just vanish.
So the political fragmentation we're seeing now, from cabinet officials to key Republican senators, will only accelerate as they look for an exit.
It will, all confirming that this presidency is approaching its final chapter. #outro.
This has been a deeply detailed analysis, and it reveals two converging tracks of decline that are impacting American governance and stability. On one hand, you have the institutional sabotage, that outrageous NSS, the legal crisis with the Secretary of Defense, and the deliberate dismantling of the National Security Council. And on the other, you see the economic and domestic instability felt by the everyday American. It's evidenced by inflation driving tariffs, rising consumer costs, and the cruel cuts to essential social services. The entire structure of American power, both at home and abroad, is shown by our sources to be in a profound state of systemic destabilization.
And if we synthesize all this material, if we connect it to the bigger picture, the entire discussion among Washington insiders is less about discovery and more about confirmation.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the internal transcripts reflect people only now officially admitting what they've long privately suspected. They see the physical signs, the signs of frailty, the frantic obsession with legacy, and they're publicly confirming what they knew was always visible, that the leader is not vigorous and that the story is drawing to a close.
So this raises the final powerful question for you, the listener, as you process this information. Why do people, voters, politicians, business leaders, why do we require official confirmation through major institutional crises or visible physical decline to act on truths that were fundamentally obvious all along?
It's a tough question.
It is. This inquiry encourages us to consider the nature of willful political or personal ignorance. What information do you currently possess about powerful figures in your own life or on the global stage information about character, corruption, or instability that you are choosing to disregard or ignore until it's officially confirmed by some undeniable crisis?
Examining that gap between knowledge and action is, I think, essential for navigating an increasingly unstable world. Until next time, we encourage you to use this deep dive to frame your understanding of the events unfolding in Washington and beyond.
Stay curious and stay informed.